My name is Laura Harper, and I am 53 years old. I have spent over 3 decades building a life with John Harper, my husband and the father of our only daughter, Isabella. We started from nothing, together, and built a home, a family, and a life that many would envy. Our love story began in college, and at that time, it seemed like we could overcome anything. Life was always full of challenges, but we tackled them together, or so I thought. John, always the dreamer and the go-getter, would bring up big ideas that would eventually lead to a business venture, a new path. I, on the other hand, was always the practical one. I supported him, always made sure we had the stability we needed, the home that was warm and inviting, and I worked hard in my career. I put my dreams aside to support his. My goal was simple: make sure we had a solid foundation for our daughter. Isabella was born shortly after our wedding, and she quickly became the center of our world. We were the perfect family, or at least I thought we were. But beneath the surface, something was slowly unraveling, something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't until much later that I realized how deeply John had started to change. Over the years, John's business ventures had always been risky. He would go after new opportunities with a passion, which I admired in the beginning, but the enthusiasm always faded. A few years after Isabella was born, John decided to quit his stable job and try his hand at a furniture business, which quickly failed. He said it was his midlife crisis, and while it frustrated me, I understood. I had spent so many years watching him chase dreams without fully committing to them, and at times it wore me down. I, on the other hand, had built a solid career in finance. I became a senior financial analyst at a top firm and worked hard, balancing my career with being a full-time mother. I worked long hours to ensure that we could afford Isabella's education and our home in the suburbs. I loved my job, but I also realized that every dream I had for myself had to be postponed. John wasn't the man he used to be, and I started taking on everything. Supporting him, taking care of Isabella, managing our home, and balancing my demanding career. My own desires, my aspirations to eventually open a financial consultancy for women, were put on hold. I thought it would all be worth it once we were financially stable again, but things didn't go as planned. Our finances were always tight, and John's ventures kept failing. Every time we made progress, he seemed to find a new passion to pursue, a new adventure that took him away from our family. Then came the phone call that would change everything. John told me he was going on a business trip, as he often did, but this time something felt different. He was vague about the details, and I began to feel a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Over the course of the next few weeks, I noticed changes. John was no longer the same attentive, loving husband I had married. He was distant, distracted, and seemed to be absent, even when he was physically present. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just another one of those phases he seemed to go through. I had always been the understanding wife, the one who let things slide because I believed in the idea of better days ahead. But deep down, I started feeling like something was terribly wrong. I started seeing signs of him pulling away, both emotionally and physically. He'd spend more time on his phone, more time away on business trips, and even when he was home, he'd retreat into his office, sometimes for hours, without explaining himself. This was different than before. It wasn't the kind of busy I had grown accustomed to. This felt like a deliberate distance. I'd walk into the room and he'd quickly shut his laptop. He'd get defensive when I asked about his day, giving short answers that didn't sound like him. It wasn't until one evening, when I walked into his office and found a text message on his phone that I couldn't ignore, that I knew the truth. "Are you ready for the weekend getaway, babe? I can't wait to finally be with you without having to sneak around." The message was from someone named Claire. It was innocent enough on the surface, but there was an undertone that made my heart drop into my stomach. I tried to breathe through the panic rising in me as I stared at the phone in my hands. I had never imagined this. Never in a million years. My first instinct was to confront him. But then I remembered something that had been nagging at the back of my mind. The fact that he had been more secretive than usual. I decided to wait. I needed to know more, to be sure, before I confronted him. I couldn't do this on a whim. But what was clear was that the man I married, the man I thought I knew, had betrayed me. The more I observed, the more the picture became clearer. John had been having an affair. Claire, the name in the text messages, wasn't just some passing fling. She was someone he was making plans with. I discovered more messages, each one confirming my worst fears. There were conversations about vacations, dinners, gifts, and even future plans. As the days passed, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to be sure. And so I began to gather evidence. I knew how to handle financial documents, and I started to look deeper into our accounts. What I found was even more alarming than the affair. John had been moving significant amounts of money into a separate account. He was preparing for his escape with Claire. I saw the withdrawals, the transfers, the gifts he had bought for her, and I began to realize just how far he had gone. I could feel my world slipping away, and yet I wasn't ready to act impulsively. I had always been the steady one, the one who held things together, and now I had to keep my composure. I started taking notes, collecting every piece of evidence, and reaching out to an attorney. I knew I was walking a fine line. John had always been the charming, charismatic one, and he could talk his way out of almost anything. But I had the facts, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into staying in a marriage that had turned into a lie. One night, after everything had sunk in, I found myself alone in the kitchen. The weight of the situation began to crash down on me. I had devoted my life to this man, to our family, and he had thrown it all away for someone else. My mind was filled with a swirl of emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal. But there was one thought that kept coming back to me. I had to take control. The days following my discovery felt like a waking nightmare. I walked around our house in a daze, the walls that had once felt like home now closing in on me. Every room, every corner held memories, some of love, some of resentment. I had built this life with John, worked so hard to create a perfect family, but it was all a lie. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the reality of what he had done gnawed at me. I had to confront the truth, but I couldn't do it until I was ready. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the way he had so easily discarded the very foundation of our marriage, the trust, the respect, the partnership we had built over 3 decades. I had stood by him through every failure, every business venture gone wrong, every risky decision that nearly bankrupted us. I had made sacrifices for him, for us. And this was how he repaid me? The affair was one thing, but what hit hardest was the financial betrayal. John, the man I had trusted with our finances for all these years, had systematically drained our joint accounts to fund his escape. He had been preparing for his new life with Claire, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. The savings we had built together for Isabella's college fund, our retirement, everything, it was all in jeopardy because of his selfishness. I couldn't understand why he would do this to me. Wasn't our family, our life together, supposed to mean something? I had spent years putting him first, putting our family first. And now he had been siphoning money, making secret transfers, planning a future with someone else? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw everything in his face. But I knew better than that. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I decided to keep calm. I had to think rationally. If I confronted him now, it would only give him a chance to manipulate the situation, to twist the narrative. He would play the victim, as he always did. I had to be smarter than that. I needed a plan. I began quietly gathering evidence. I knew John had been meticulous with his secretive transactions, but I was more methodical. I was a financial professional, and I knew how to trace money. I started by documenting every irregularity I had noticed in our accounts. I made sure to keep track of every withdrawal, every deposit, every transfer to Claire's account. The amounts were substantial. It wasn't just a few hundred here and there. He had been siphoning off tens of thousands of dollars over the past year. I kept a detailed record of all the transactions and started building a timeline. I reached out to my lawyer, who advised me to gather as much information as possible before taking action. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. John was planning a life with Claire, and he was willing to take everything I had worked for. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, and that made it even worse. As I reviewed the documents, I noticed something else. Our prenuptial agreement. It had been a point of contention when we first signed it, especially with John insisting that we protect his future wealth. I had agreed to it at the time, not fully understanding the potential consequences. But now, as I looked at it again, I realized that it could be my saving grace. The prenuptial agreement had a fidelity clause, one that John had never fully grasped. If he was found to be unfaithful, he would lose a significant portion of our shared assets. It was the perfect leverage. I spent the next few weeks in a state of quiet determination. I didn't confront John. Instead, I began preparing myself for what was to come. I consulted with my lawyer regularly, making sure I was taking all the right steps. I was focused, calculating, and unwavering. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about reclaiming what was mine and protecting my future. I could feel the distance between John and me growing, but he didn't seem to notice. He was so absorbed in his own plans that he didn't realize I was watching him, watching everything. He continued to spend more time on his phone, more time away from home. His guilt was evident, but he didn't seem to care. He was too consumed by his desire for a new life, one that didn't include me. At the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Every conversation I had with John felt like an empty exchange. I couldn't talk to him the way we used to. He had become a stranger, and every interaction was a reminder of how far we had drifted. It was a slow burn, but it was there, eating away at everything we had built. And then it happened, the moment I had been waiting for. One evening, John came home from another business trip with Claire. He looked at me, his face flushed with guilt, and for a moment I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it was too late for that. I had already made my decision. I had been planning for months, preparing for this exact moment. I knew how I wanted to approach it, how I wanted to handle it. I had made the choice to confront him, but not in the way he expected. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Instead, I would be calm, collected, and ready. I waited until the next morning. It was a Saturday, and the sun was just beginning to rise. John was still asleep, his face peaceful in the morning light. I got out of bed and walked into the living room. I took a deep breath and looked around the house. This had been our home for over 2 decades, but it no longer felt like mine. It was a place filled with memories, some happy, some painful. And now, it was time to take control of my future. I opened my laptop and began preparing the divorce papers. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just taking the legal steps. I was taking back my life.
The days that followed were a blur of meticulous planning. I felt like I was living in a state of limbo, suspended between the life I had built with John and the uncertain future that lay ahead. On the outside, everything remained the same. I continued with my work, managing my accounts with the same precision I had always had. But inside, everything was different. Every conversation with John felt like a silent war. The distance between us had grown wider, and I could feel it in every word we exchanged, every glance he threw my way. John, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon. He was distracted, consumed by the new life he was building with Claire. I noticed the subtle changes, the extra time spent at work, the late-night calls, the secretive texts he thought I didn't see. He thought he had me fooled, but I wasn't the naive woman he married. I had spent years building our finances, and I knew exactly where every dollar went. I had caught him in small lies before, but this time it was different. This time, I had the evidence. One afternoon, while I was reviewing some financial documents, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer, Kate. She had been working with me for weeks, quietly gathering the information we needed to file for divorce. She had seen the evidence I had collected, and now it was time to take action. The message read, "Everything's in place. Are you ready?" I paused for a moment, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. It wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and everything I had worked so hard to protect. The moment had arrived. The next day, I sat down with John to have a conversation. He had no idea that everything was about to change. We had just finished dinner, and I could see the exhaustion on his face. He was still wearing that same distracted expression, the one he always wore after spending time with Claire. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and impatience. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice steady but resolute. He paused, setting down his fork. "Can we do this later? I've had a long day." "No," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Now is the time, John. We can't keep pretending." He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, but not fully grasping the gravity of what was coming. "What are you talking about?" I met his eyes, unflinching. "I know about Claire. I know about the affair, and I know about the money you've been moving around. The transfers, the hidden accounts, the property you've been looking at. It's all been so obvious." His face paled, and for the first time in months, I saw something resembling fear in his eyes. You don't understand," he began, his voice shaky. "It's not what you think. I was just trying to—" I interrupted him. "Don't lie to me. Don't pretend you weren't planning this. I've seen the texts. I know everything." His silence was deafening. The man who had always been so confident, so sure of himself, was now completely exposed. I could see the weight of his actions settling in, and I knew, deep down, that this was the moment he realized he had lost everything. "I want to divorce," I said, my voice calm but final. "You can't be serious. We've been together for 20 years. This isn't something you can just walk away from." I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "No, John. This isn't just something you can walk away from. You destroyed everything we built. You betrayed me, and you thought you could get away with it. Well, you were wrong." That evening, I took the first step in reclaiming my life. I drove to Kate's office, where we had a scheduled meeting to finalize the divorce papers. Kate was a no-nonsense woman, someone who had seen it all in her years as a family lawyer. She looked up from her desk as I entered, her expression one of calm assurance. "Are you ready?" she asked, with a slight smile on her lips. I nodded. "Yes, let's do it." We went over the final details, the asset division, the alimony, the custody arrangements for Isabella. It was all lined up. I had already made sure that I would retain the house, my share of the investments, and a substantial portion of the joint savings. John had thought he could steal everything, but I had anticipated this move. The prenuptial agreement we had signed years ago, with its infidelity clause, was now my greatest weapon. I signed the papers, feeling the weight of the decision lift off my shoulders. As I handed the documents to Kate, I knew there was no going back. This was it. My life as I knew it was over. But a new chapter was beginning, one where I was in control. The next few days were a blur of emotions and uncertainty. I didn't see John after my confrontation, and I didn't want to. I needed space to think, to plan, and to come to terms with the end of my marriage. I spent time with Isabella, doing my best to shield her from the turmoil that was unfolding. She knew something was wrong, but I didn't want her to carry the burden of my heartbreak. Meanwhile, John was scrambling. He tried to reach out to me several times, sending texts and emails, but I ignored them all. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and he was now faced with the consequences of his actions. And then the moment came, the day I had been dreading. John came to the house to retrieve his things, to finalize the separation. I could see the desperation in his eyes as he stepped through the door, his face drawn and weary. He said, "I don't want this. This isn't how it was supposed to end." I looked at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "This is how it ends, John. You made this choice. You betrayed me, and now you have to face the consequences." I watched him gather his things, his every moment slow and deliberate. He knew this was it. There was no going back. As he left, he turned to me one last time. He said, "I'm sorry, Laura. I made a mistake." I nodded, my expression calm. "Yes, you did. And now we both have to live with it."
The day after John's departure, the house felt eerily quiet. I had always loved the silence, but this time it felt suffocating. The memories that had once filled the walls with warmth were now just reminders of the betrayal I had endured. Everything in this house had once been ours. The furniture we'd picked together, the family portraits hanging on the walls, the rug Isabella used to play on as a child. Now it was just a shell, a house without life, and I was determined to turn the page on this chapter of my life. But there was still work to be done. I spent the next few days making arrangements, finalizing details with Kate about the divorce, and preparing for what would be the hardest battle yet, one where I would have to face John in court. It wasn't just about getting out of this marriage anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure that he understood the depth of the consequences of his actions. I wouldn't just let him walk away, free from the mess he had created. At times, I felt the urge to reach out to him, to tell him I was okay, that I was moving on, but I resisted. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of thinking he could still manipulate me. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was something else, a woman who had been tested and had come out stronger for it. I wasn't going to let him take everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I had prepared myself, but as I stood outside the courtroom waiting for my turn, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach. There was no turning back now. My life was about to change forever, and whether I won or lost, there was no going back to the life I had known. I walked into the courtroom with Kate by my side. My heart pounded as I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Across from me, John sat with his lawyer, the same lawyer who had helped him through countless business deals. But this wasn't a business matter. This was personal. John looked different, his usual confident air replaced by a nervous tension. He hadn't expected this fight.
He thought he could cheat and walk away without any consequences. But today, he would learn that life doesn't always work that way. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, glanced between our tables before turning to speak. "Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, I understand this is a difficult matter. You both have been together for a long time, and this division of assets and responsibilities will not be easy. However, I expect both of you to remain civil and professional during these proceedings." John's lawyer immediately started speaking, attempting to downplay the seriousness of the situation, claiming that John had made an honest mistake and that the affair shouldn't have such a strong impact on the division of assets. His argument was weak, and I could see Kate shaking her head as she prepared to counter every single claim. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and looked directly at John. I wasn't going to show any weakness. "Your Honor, I am not here for revenge. I am here to protect myself and my daughter. The financial manipulations, the betrayal, this is not something I can just let slide. I have worked hard my entire life to support this family. John took advantage of that, and now I am taking back what's rightfully mine." I laid out the facts clearly: the hidden bank accounts, the transfers to Claire, and the lavish spending on his affair. I explained how he had used our money to create a separate life, all while telling me we had to cut back for the future. I pointed out that he had no legal leg to stand on when it came to the prenuptial agreement, which explicitly stated that infidelity would result in a different division of assets. The judge nodded, clearly impressed with my case. I could feel John's eyes on me, but I refused to look at him. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, and about the life I would now build for myself. It felt like hours before the judge finally called us back into the courtroom for her decision. My hands were clammy, but I held my composure. John, on the other hand, looked like a man who had lost everything. His face was pale, his jaw tight. I could see the anxiety in his eyes. The judge took a moment to review her notes before speaking. After reviewing the prenuptial agreement, the evidence provided, and the testimonies, I have come to a decision. The financial accounts in question will remain frozen pending further investigation, and Mr. Phillips will be required to reimburse Mrs. Phillips for any unapproved transfers. The family home will remain in Mrs. Phillips' possession, as outlined in the prenuptial agreement. Mr. Phillips will be responsible for a portion of the debts incurred during the affair. As for alimony, Mrs. Phillips is entitled to a fair amount based on the asset and liabilities, and I am ruling in her favor. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The judge's decision was fair and firm, and I knew that I had won. But as I looked across the room at John, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for what we had once shared. It was over. There was no going back. In the weeks that followed, the reality of the divorce set in. I moved into a small apartment in a quieter part of the city while I looked for a new place to call home. Isabella was adjusting well to the changes, and I made sure to keep her focused on her studies and future. John tried to reach out to me a few times, but I ignored his calls. I knew that this was for the best. He had made his choice, and now it was my turn to live for myself. I didn't need him anymore. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let him take that away from me. With the help of my lawyer, I began the process of selling the family home and dividing up the remaining assets. I also started to explore new career opportunities, something I had put on hold for years. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape.
As the days passed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started networking with women in the business community and even enrolled in a few courses to sharpen my skills. My past experiences as a finance manager were valuable, but I knew I needed more than just a job. I wanted a career where I could help others, especially women who had been through the same thing I had. With a renewed sense of purpose, I launched my financial consultancy. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. I wanted to make sure that women never had to go through what I had endured, not just the betrayal, but the financial hardship that came with it. Within months, my business began to grow. Word of mouth spread quickly, and soon I had clients reaching out to me for advice. I specialized in helping women navigate the complexities of divorce, finances, and starting over. As my business flourished, so did my confidence. I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, one where I was in control of my future. In the months that followed the court hearing, I focused entirely on rebuilding. The silence in my new apartment was different from the quiet of our old home. It wasn't the echoing void of a family broken. Instead, it was a space where I could finally breathe without the constant fear of being deceived. I didn't waste time mourning what had been lost. Instead, I poured myself into my new venture, a financial consultancy aimed at helping women navigate life after divorce and financial instability. I had always been good with numbers, with tracking expenses and making sure everything added up. I knew how to survive in this world on my own, and now I was going to help others do the same. I realized that my experience with John had taught me more than just how to deal with betrayal. It had taught me the power of independence and resilience. I would never rely on anyone else again, especially not someone like him. The first few weeks were hard. I had to push myself out of my comfort zone, reaching out to people in my community, attending networking events, and telling my story. The fear of rejection was overwhelming at times, but each new client I secured was a victory. Each person who trusted me to guide them was a reminder that I was on the right path. Soon, I was helping women like me, women who had been betrayed, women who had lost everything to a spouse's greed or infidelity. They had no idea what to do with their finances, how to start over, or how to find their confidence again. I made sure they knew they weren't alone. I taught them about financial planning, investments, and how to protect themselves moving forward. I wasn't just teaching them how to survive, I was helping them thrive. One day, as I was working on a client's case, I received a call from Amelia. She had been busy with her job in New York and hadn't been able to visit much. But her voice, when she picked up, was full of warmth and love. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. You're doing incredible things. I see it, and I know you're helping so many people. I can't believe how far you've come." I smiled to myself. Amelia had been my rock through all of this, and hearing her words made it all worth it. She had been through so much, and now she was watching me rebuild my life, just as I had always hoped to do for her. As I sat in my office, looking out over the city skyline, I realized that everything had changed. The woman who once thought her worth was tied to her marriage, to a man who would never appreciate her, was now someone entirely different. I was stronger, more confident, and more driven than ever. I didn't need John. I didn't need anyone. I had found a new sense of purpose, and that was more valuable than anything he could have ever given me. I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened, the betrayal, the anger, the sadness, and finally the peace that came with knowing I had fought for my future. The woman who had been betrayed was gone, and in her place was a woman who had taken control of her life. I realized that this was my new beginning, and I was going to make the most of it. The consultancy was doing well, and I had plans to expand. My vision was clear. I wanted to be the voice of support and guidance for women going through what I had been through. Women who had been betrayed, women who felt like they had nothing left. I wanted to show them that it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. I made a vow to myself that I would never settle for less than what I deserved. I would never let anyone control my life again, not even for a second. I would be the one in charge of my destiny, and I would make sure that every woman who came to me for help felt the same way. As I reflected on all that had happened, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced my greatest challenge and come out stronger on the other side. I had fought for myself, and I had won. And now the future was mine for the taking. A year later, my consultancy was thriving. I had hired a small team to help with the increasing number of clients, and we had even started offering workshops and webinars to reach more women. I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, a life where I was in control, where I was doing something meaningful and making a difference. John had tried to contact me a few times, but I had no interest in reconnecting with him. He was nothing but a chapter in my past, a painful chapter, but one that had taught me invaluable lessons. I had moved on, and so had he. He had sold the house, his business had struggled, and he was now living in a small apartment. Cassandra was long gone, her dream of a lavish life shattered by the reality of John's failed business ventures. I saw less and less of him in my life, and that was how I wanted it. The only thing that mattered now was Isabella, my clients, and the legacy I was building. I had spent too many years supporting someone else's dreams to not chase my own. I had become someone I was proud of. Someone who had taken control of her life and turned a devastating betrayal into a powerful comeback. I didn't need John or anyone else to validate my worth. I had found it all within myself. As I sat in my office, watching the sunset over the city, I felt the deep sense of satisfaction. I had done it. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the best was yet to come.